Hello everybody, Mark Schaftlein with you, and this is the Schaftlein Report. It is Tuesday's edition, and we're broadcasting from Southern California and the great state of New Jersey. Dr. Michael Busler, welcome back to Schaftlein Report. Happy to have you with me today.
Well, thanks for having me. As you know, it's always my pleasure to be here.
Michael, you're a terrific guest, and your views or our audience is enthralled every time you come on. But I got to tell you, we really have to start today with an area outside your and my expertise, unfortunately, but the attacks and the atrocities that we're witnessing, they're getting worse by the minute, and the sheer size and scope and the slaughter of what the Israelis are dealing with, it's
Horrible.
comparable to 9/11, but it's 30 times worse given the population difference between Israel and the United States.
Yeah, and you said a couple of things there that are key. You said it keeps getting worse. I heard this morning that they found 40 children, some babies that were killed, and some of them were beheaded.
Yes.
To behead a young child or a baby, that's a whole different level of evil. And this truly is evil. I think this time Israel has finally had enough of this. They've given in. They gave them land. They said in Gaza, they said the Palestinians would exist peacefully. Within a few years, they voted out their party, Fatah, I think it was called, and voted in Hamas. And then they didn't have any more elections. And Hamas has run that horribly, gone back on the promises. Israel's in a very difficult position. They're being attacked from, what is that, the west, where Gaza is. Then up north, you have Hezbollah in Lebanon, and they're starting to fire off some things too. And Iran definitely played a part in this. There's no way that those organizations could have financed the type of attack they did without Iran's money. And they say, well, where did Iran get all the money? I thought we had sanctions on them. When the current administration was sworn in, President Biden said, look, we're going to try to work together with Iran and not be so hostile. The prior administration had put sanctions on them and froze all their assets. And yeah, they're going to be hostile as a result of that. So we're going to go in and we're going to try to sort of appease them. We're going to lift some of the sanctions. So instead of them being able to sell $3 billion a day of oil, they're now up to $25 billion a day in oil. And all that money accumulates and they don't use it for humanitarian purposes. And that's why their population is revolting all the time. Instead, they use it to finance terror. They financed Hamas. They financed Hezbollah. And I have a feeling, I don't know, but I have a feeling that they were involved in the planning of this whole thing, in addition to supplying all those weapons. This is a horrible thing. I think Israel is going to wipe out Hamas, so eliminate them completely. And that's not going to be an easy thing to do. There's hostages there, some American apparently, so that's not going to be a very easy thing to do. But with their precision and with a minimum of casualties, they're going to go in and wipe out Hamas. It's not going to happen overnight. It may take some time, but they will. If Hezbollah from the north continues their barrage, I wouldn't be surprised if Israel tried to wipe them out too. And then there's some talk, and this is getting very aggressive, but there's some talk that, look, Iran is very close to a nuclear weapon. The last thing we need for peace in the Middle East and really the world is for Iran to have a nuclear weapon. So they're talking about wiping out Iran's nuclear capabilities. Now, that's not an easy thing because they're very spread out around the country. Most of their facilities are underground. So you need a special kind of a bomb, not a penetrating bomb, but something that can penetrate the surface and go down there. Israel doesn't have those, but the U.S. does. So if the U.S. gives those to Israel, they can really wipe out Iran's nuclear program. Now that's fraught with all kinds of risks. But still, I think we finally have to put an end to this. We can't keep living with these terrorist organizations that just pop up every year or so and cause havoc. The prior administration said we have to wipe ISIS out. It took us about 30 days to do that, but we were able to wipe ISIS out. I think we're going to need that kind of an effort from Israel, working with the U.S. Now, we don't have to put boots on the ground, but we give them our equipment. We just sent over the aircraft carrier
Right.
Gerald Ford, which is a brand new state of the art. I think it holds up to 90 aircraft.
Yes.
So Israel can use that as a launching pad, and maybe we can finally be rid of these terrorist organizations once and for all.
Well, the Wall Street Journal has confirmed that Iran
Yes.
was involved, and Hamas has effectively admitted the Iranians helped them plan the attacks. So,
Yeah.
I mean, for people in our country on the political left to be Neville Chamberlain-like,
That's exactly what it is.
I mean, that is what it is. Calling it a spade is, you know, the similar things happen. Now, we're awaiting comments from our president, and I hope he takes a very aggressive stance, not only just voicing support for Israel, but whatever Israel needs to defeat this organization. And you are right, Michael, it is not something that's going to, in my opinion, this will take longer than it did with ISIS. It will involve multiple casualties. There's going to be death on both sides, but a country cannot exist if it's constantly subjected to missiles. Think about this from our own country. Can you imagine the outrage in this country? Think back to 9/11 and how people felt. Imagine if 30 times the scale of that based upon the population. And the evidence that they're continuing to uncover. You mentioned babies, the elderly, young kids.
Horrible.
This is beyond the scope. I mean, you can sort of comprehend buildings coming down, but when you look at the sheer scope and the horrific conditions and what they're still just, as we're on the air right now talking, as I mentioned at the intro of the show, it's getting worse by the minute. Now, I listened to the Israeli defense spokesperson, and he indicated that 1,500 Hamas fighters had either been killed or captured. And they're extracting information from some of the ones that survived. So these death toll numbers, Michael, are going to go up astronomically. Right. And as to the Iranian situation, Netanyahu came on and he said that for generations, this will be a period of time where people look back. And I believe what you said. I don't know whether they're going to go after the Iranians, but I do know that they are going to do their damnedest to wipe out Hamas, because a country cannot exist if it's continuing to deal with missiles being launched on a daily basis.
That's exactly right. So it's a very frightening time. There are some other players that we have to worry about who work with Iran, Russia. I'm not sure Russia can do a whole lot. They're kind of tied up in Ukraine there, and they're running out of munitions and things. But I don't know how countries like North Korea and China, you just don't know how they react to something like this. But it's time for us to get tough. And it's time for Israel and the U.S. to say, we're going to put an end to this. I'm tired of people screaming, death to Israel, death to America. And then we end up helping all these people, even though they're saying those things. So it's time to wipe out evil. We have to get evil out of here and wipe off the face of the earth. And even if the price is high, I'd like to see Israel, with the help of the U.S., do that.
Well, let's sort of tie this in. I know at times it may seem on days like today when you're seeing this horrific news unfolding, but we do have a responsibility to our audience, you and I, to talk about the economic implications of this, because even though it may not be the perfect timing wise, there are major implications, Michael, from the potential fallout. And let's just start with oil, for example.
Oil, yeah.
I mean, we have to start there, because oil, despite what a lot of the greenies and the lefties, the world runs on oil.
Yeah.
Yeah. So dive
So
into
yeah, and that's a huge implication. Look, the Biden administration wants to wean the U.S. from fossil fuels and onto renewable energy. I don't think that's a bad idea. You just can't do it overnight.
right.
It's going to take some time, and you should let the market do it rather than the government trying to interfere, which always makes things more difficult. But right now, we do need oil in order for every country in the world to operate. Now, the U.S. was energy independent when Biden first came into office.
Right.
He canceled the Keystone Pipeline. He can't drill on federal lands, made the permitting process more difficult, told banks not to lend to the petroleum industry because there's no future there. As a result, we went from 12.5 million barrels a day down to 11 million barrels a day. Now that the price has gone up from what it was a few years ago, U.S. production is back up over 12 million. But had Biden not done what he did, the Keystone Pipeline would be open. That's almost a million barrels a day that would be added. Federal lands can be drilled upon. So we'd be producing much more oil today, had this all been allowed to happen, than we actually are producing. That would keep energy prices down. That would help with our inflation problem, which has not gone away. That'll help with our inflation problem, and geopolitically keeping us not having to bring some oil in from other countries and asking, people that don't like us, like in Venezuela and other countries, to provide oil. We can put a stop to that if we would just unleash American enterprise and let the petroleum industry go forward.
Well, let's talk about the 800-pound gorilla in the room, which is Saudi Arabia. There are certain commentators who have, without knowledge, but their opinions, like anybody else's, have said that one of the reasons Hamas the timing of this attack, besides the holiday, could have been the fact that the Israelis and the Saudis, as a result of the Abraham Accords, were getting closer as countries. Now, a lot of people may have a hard time grasping that. At one point, Saudi Arabia and Israel were on this track. And
Yes.
under President Trump, for everybody who criticized the president, that reversed and came back towards this way.
Yes.
Now, the Saudis have a historical relationship with the Palestinian people, not Hamas. But that could be a dicey situation, Michael, because while the Israelis militarily have to protect their interests, there was a lot of work done to establish that Israel-Saudi relationship. And that relationship, again, I don't want to judge things here, but it is a delicate situation right now. Can you talk a little about the implications and what the risks are related to that?
Yeah, so Saudi Arabia is the largest country in the Middle East, and they're sort of the leader of the Muslim world. So it would have been very impactful to have the Israel and Saudi Arabia sign an agreement extending some of these Abraham Accords. The Israelis don't have a problem with the Palestinian people per se.
Right.
The problem is with the leadership, and Hamas getting put in there, stopped having elections. I think if Hamas was not there anymore, the Palestinians and the Israelis could find some way to get together. And I think the Israelis are going to talk to the Saudis and say, listen, we've got to wipe out Hamas. It's not good for anybody. We'll do everything we possibly can to minimize the effect on the Palestinian people. And just this morning, their time, they put out leaflets and as much information as possible. They told all the Palestinians to leave Gaza. You can walk over to Egypt. Now, they closed their border for a while, then they opened it, and then they closed it, and I think they opened it again. But they're trying to tell the Palestinian people to get out of there. We have no gripe with you. Our gripe is with Hamas. And if you can leave, we'll get Hamas out of there. Once they're out of there, everybody can come back, and maybe we can live peacefully. The real trick for the Israelis is the hostages, and the Hamas. They're savage terrorists. What they've said is, if you continue bombing, we're going to take a hostage and kill a hostage, and broadcast the killing of the hostage. So it's a very difficult position for Israel to be in. But the primary goal has to be to wipe out Hamas and do it with as little casualties as possible and ensure all of Israel's allies and potential friends that we have nothing against the Palestinian people. Frankly, we don't have anything against the Iranian people either. I've been to conferences with Iranian scholars and we get along marvelously. Nobody talks politics, but we get along marvelously. My experience has been, I've been to the Middle East 3 times, my experience has been that these are very warm people. They're very family oriented people. It's the leadership that's in there that doesn't allow them to even speak is what's causing the problem. So any attacking that Israel with the U.S. or without them even does has nothing to do with the people. It has to do with the evil leadership that's involved in these places.
Well, and you just put your finger on the problem there. I mean, it's my understanding, Michael, correct me if I'm wrong, but there's roughly 2 million Palestinian people living in the Gaza Strip. I mean,
Yeah,
how do you
and
move?
that's a it.
How do you move
It's a
2 million
small
people?
country
Yeah,
too.
very tiny. I mean, is Egypt prepared for an exodus of upwards of 2 million people? I mean,
I'm not
how does
sure.
that
Maybe
happen?
maybe that's why Egypt had opened the border, then they shut it, then they opened it again. So maybe they're a little nervous about all these people um, coming in. But Israel has said you have to leave. We're going to get Hamas and we're going to go to every building where they are and every house where they are if we have to and annihilate them. We're trying not to hurt the Palestinian people. If you can get out of the way, that will make things better for all of us. So we started talking about energy and the price of oil. So initially, now I thought the price of oil would be in the 95, perhaps close to $100 a barrel range by the end of the year. And I based that on the fact that Saudi Arabia and Russia, two large producers, have cut back on
Right.
production. And when you do that, that'll raise the price. But what I really thought would happen was the China economy would recover. Remember, they
Hmm.
shut their economy down completely at the end of 2022. They're having a heck of a time getting it started. So there's weak demand from China, and that's helping to keep the price of oil down. It had gotten up to $94 a barrel for a while. Then it dropped down to in the low 80s. Now with this turmoil in the Mideast, it's increased a little bit up to $85. I haven't looked at it today, but um, we'll see what happens. So one potential problem, if the price of oil continues to go up, and I'm not sure it will, but if it does, then that's going to put pressure on gasoline prices, obviously. The consumer price index, about 30% of it is energy.
Right.
So if energy starts to go up in price, you're going to see the consumer price index going up. Recall the CPI peaked out at 9% on an annualized basis, 9% in June of 2022. By June of 2023, we had it down to 3%. President Biden took a victory lap. Look, this is all over. However, in July, it went up to 3.2. In August, it went up to 3.7. The September number, I think, comes out on Thursday. It should be fairly mild, but the annualized rate will still be, I think, in the 3.7 range. If oil goes up in the next couple months, you could see the CPI annualized going up over 4%. That's going to cause the Federal Reserve to continuing tightening and to continue to raise interest rates. Personally, I know people aren't going to like this when I say it, but I don't think interest rates are quite high enough
Oh, I
to
agree
really
with you.
get rid of the inflation problem. Now, I thought, frankly, I thought a year ago when they started raising interest rates in June of 2022, I thought the federal funds rate would have to get up to about 6%. They started raising at the end of 22, three quarters of a point each time. And then when it got up to close to 5, they started easing up. This last time they stopped raising it. So the federal funds rate is now in the 5.25, 5.5% range. I still think it's got to go up about 50 basis points really to get this inflation down. Now, what's some of the reasons why I'm saying that? I've been thinking a recession is just around the corner, and I've been saying that for the last
We
six to
talked
nine
about
months
it.
or so. We did talk about that. Why hasn't that happened? Why was I wrong? Well, what happened was consumers um, had more money to spend than I thought. Where did they get all the money? The federal government handed out all this free money to everybody
Yeah.
in 20 and 21. Much of that money was saved. And then when the economy reopened and we're moving forward, consumers spent that money. But they sort of ran out of that money early this year. So I thought, well, consumer spending is going to go down now, and that will contribute to a slowdown in the economy. But what did consumers do? They got so used to spending money, they started putting everything on their credit cards.
Yeah.
Now credit cards are maxed out. Consumer credit card debt for the first time in history, just credit card debt now exceeds $1 trillion. So that kept the economy going. Why do I say interest rates weren't high enough? If interest rates were higher, they might have thought a little harder about using those credit cards and maxing things out. But now they're maxed out. I don't have any hard data yet. But the business people I talk to, especially the retailers, tell me in the month of September that consumers started to cut back on their spending. Now, again, I don't have any hard data on that. But if that's the case, that certainly makes sense with spending everything, maxing out your credit cards, and now you're finally going to cut back. So if that's the case, we could slide into a recession. I hate to keep saying this.
No, but
We could slide into a recession perhaps in the fourth quarter in the next year. Third quarter GDP, the number comes out the end of October. It's going to be a little stronger, I think, than people suspect. The first half of this year, we're growing at about a 2% rate. I think in the third quarter, it might even be a little better than that 2% rate, and then we'll see what happens in the fourth quarter.
well, let me let me share this with you. I filled up my gas tank the other day, 6.39 a gallon. Thank you out here in
Wow.
California,
Wow.
6.39, and that was at a discount gas station. I mean, you go to a Chevron, a Shell, whatever, 6.59. I mean, Michael, people back east, when I tell them that, they're sort of in shock by what we're dealing with out here. But let me go along the lines of what you talked about too, because I believe that with oil prices elevated, and I think they could go a little bit higher. That is, if you take rising oil prices, if that happens, with the input that it has in the CPI, coupled with the sheer dollar amount, over $1 trillion on the credit cards, student loans having to start making payments again. I mean, at a certain point, this becomes problematic. Now, interest rates have been rising. I mean, we've now, though, changed to where we had a big gap between the 2-year note and the 10-year note. That's shrunk considerably. It's down to like 30 basis points right now, 30, 35, 40, where before it was over 100 basis points. Michael, that causes some unease out there, but the market seems to believe we may have peaked out on interest rates about over the last week to 10 days. Now, I don't see that, but the market's telling me that maybe 4.75, 4.8, 4.85, near 5% on a 10-year, it's not going to go above that again.
Yeah, I don't know if it will or not, but as I said, I don't think the Fed is done raising interest rates yet. So that's going to put upward pressure on interest rates, and I think they will go a little bit higher. Look, mortgage rates are now up to about 7.5%. Now sales are down, but people are still buying houses at the 7.5% rate. I don't know if they're younger or older people. I'm old enough to remember in 1981 when mortgage rates were 16, 18%. So I don't think it'll get quite that bad. But what I'm really worried about now is a wage price spiral. So
Yep.
what is that? So inflation goes up a little bit. The workers say, well, inflation went up. I need a raise more than that. And then labor costs go up. So they have to raise prices more. And you get into this wage price spiral. It's starting to happen now. Historically, in the decades before the pandemic, people were getting a 3-4% raise, and
Right.
everybody was happy with that. If you asked for a raise much above 5%, people thought you were crazy. Now they're asking for 9% annual wage increases, and people are just in an inflation psychology that says, well, I guess that's going to happen. So if the auto workers give in, if the automobile companies give in, and you end up with high wage increases, that's going to cement high labor costs for the next 3 years, and inflation is going to be very difficult to eliminate. Ronald Reagan said it, and I talked about the Federal Reserve in 2021. I call it their shockingly irresponsible monetary policy, where they expanded the money supply and kept interest rates near zero. It wasn't until 2022, the middle of 2022, that they did something. Ronald Reagan said, inflation is a cancer. It
Yes.
must be treated early and aggressively, and we didn't do that.
Yeah.
So now we're stuck with a problem, and if this wage price spiral comes, it will be even a more severe problem with inflation.
Well, to your credit, and I remember 2021 because you and I appeared together and we talked about these things. And
Yes, we did.
we missed a few things, but 3/4 of the time we were right about what we were projecting, and not patting ourselves on the back, but that's just sort of a fact that did happen. Michael, we got a couple minutes left. I do want to touch on one other thing it's sort of percolating underneath. And this, I'm not blaming Republicans, I'm not blaming Democrats, because the budget deficit skyrocketed under both President Trump and under President Biden. But, we're sitting on close to $32 trillion of debt right now.
30,
Yeah,
33 now.
33 now. And with interest rates going up basically 400 basis points from where it was a couple years ago, the cost to finance these trillion-dollar deficits is through the roof. Michael, at a certain point in time, and you hear economists talking about this is going to have an effect on the overall economy. Please elaborate.
Yeah, I think we're at that point. Economists historically have said if the public debt is less than 1 year's GDP, it's manageable.
Right.
Above that, you have a problem. GDP is about 24 trillion. We're up in the $33 trillion range. We're way above that. So what kind of problems are that? Well, as you mentioned, the interest expenses are almost 500 billion a year now, and they'll continue to get worse, because when the government has a deficit, they sell 10, 20-year bonds. When the bonds mature, they don't have money to pay them back. So what do? They sell new bonds to pay back the old bonds. They roll over the debt. So now you're taking some bonds with an interest rate of 1.5%, replacing them with bonds at 4%. So even if you took on no more debt, the interest expense is going to skyrocket. This is something we have to address now. Every president has kicked the can down the road. We're at the end of the road. We have to address this problem now. Real quick, the reason government spending is so hard to bring down is this. 60% of the spending goes to entitlement programs, Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid. A politician says, I'm going to cut that, you're finished.
Right.
Almost 10% of the budget now goes to pay interest on the debt. You have to pay that. That's 70% almost of the budget. The remaining 30% roughly is half in social programs and half in defense. We can't cut defense now. The world is, so we can't cut that. That leaves just social programs, and the Democrats in the Senate and the president say, look, there's so much social injustice now and all this income equality that we can't cut there. So where do you cut spending? There's no place really to cut the spending. That's why it's so difficult. I'll tell you what the answer is, and I will run out of time. I'll tell you what the answer is: entitlement programs. There's no good answer to get that spending down. So if there's no good answer, let's find the answer that's least bad.
Right.
The least bad answer is to raise the retirement age at least to 70 and eventually up to 75. And people are living 80, 90, 100 years old now, so it's not such a bad thing.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%. I mean, they can tweak, I hate saying this, but when you quote, tweak around the edges on the social programs, you're taking a lot of political energy attacking a smaller slice of the overall federal budget, the deficit. But your idea has a lot of merit. Raising the age, and I'll tell you one other thing, and it's not politically popular to say, but increasing the amount of income susceptible to the Social Security tax. I mean, I hate saying that as a Republican, but the reality is either revenues this is like any business. Either your revenues go up or you cut the expenses or you're out of business. And
so if you raise the retirement age, that's less you're going to have to spend because people will be working longer. Plus, you have more revenue coming in because people are working longer, and that'll solve it. And people say, well, how could you have somebody work to 70? When they put Social Security in 1935, you retired at 65. The average life expectancy was 67. Today, if you retire today, the Social Security Administration will say plan to live at least 20 years.
yeah.
And some people will live a lot longer. Social Security can't handle that.
Well, as always, Dr. Michael Busler, it has been, we could go on, folks. This show could be an hour and we could still be talking about this. Michael, I want you to come back sooner. We're going to have a lot of issues to talk about, but thank you again for taking time out of your schedule today. And it is a pleasure having you on Schaftlein Report.
Thank you. It's always my pleasure to be here. Look forward to doing it again.
Okay, folks, we'll be back on Thursday. And again, stay safe, particularly Americans in these big cities. The world's a crazy place right now, and we want everyone to remain safe and calm. And our prayers and our best wishes go out to the Israeli people. Thank you for viewing today. We'll see you on Thursday.